It wasn't the loneliness that broke me. It was the moment I stopped expecting anyone to notice when the world grew quiet. And I forgot how to ask for light. That's when they stayed, not loudly, not with grand promises, but with presence so steady. It softened the silence, so this is the story of the friend who didn't leave even when I did. The days began like echoes, one after another, fading without form. I woke not because I wanted to, but because the weight of staying asleep too long eventually grew heavier than getting up. The clock on the wall ticked too slowly to measure time. So I stopped watching it, and time stopped watching me. There was a chair by the window I never sat in because it was too close to the sky. Too close to hope. I stayed curled in corners, in shadows, in the warmth of unwashed blankets and excuses I let. Texts go unanswered, calls disappear into voicemail until my phone became just another silent object in a silent room. Then one morning, a sound, a knock, not loud, not urgent, but real, soft, rhythmic, like someone knew I wouldn't open the door but knocked. Anyway, I didn't move, not at first, not the second time either, but on the third knock, I stood barefoot on cold floor. No plan, just breath, and when I opened it, there they were, a friend I hadn't seen in months, years. Maybe time had warped too much. To tell, they didn't say much, didn't ask questions. They just held up a bag of warm bread and a paper cup with my favorite tea. "Still hot," they said. "I thought you might need this," and I didn't know how to say thank you, because I had forgotten what kindness felt like when it wasn't earned, so I nodded, a small one, a broken one, but they saw it, and they smiled, like it was enough that first day. They didn't stay long, just a few minutes, enough to fill the room with something other than emptiness, enough to leave the air scented with cinnamon and comfort. They left a note written by hand, folded once. "You don't have to talk, you don't even have to open the door. Next time I'll still be here." Rye stared at that note longer than I had stared at anything in weeks, because it didn't ask for anything, it only offered presence. The next day they came again, no knock, just a quiet rustling as they set something down, another paper cup, this time chamomile, and a tiny box of matcha. Cookie's eye peeked through the curtain, watched them walk away, no urgency, no need to be seen. Just the soft steps of someone who understood that healing doesn't rush. On the fourth day, I opened the door before they could walk away. They smiled, I said. "I don't know how to do this anymore," they replied. "You don't have to know. I'm not here for the knowing, I'm just here." We sat on the floor that day, not talking, not filling the space, just sharing it. The quiet felt different when it wasn't empty. Somewhere between sips of tea, they took a deep breath and said, "You don't have to be okay, but you deserve not to be alone." Looked down, because eye contact felt too loud, but my heart heard it, and in that moment I realized I had forgotten how much I had longed for someone to see me without flinching. They came again the next day and the day after, and again, always bringing small things. A soft scarf, a candle that smelled like vanilla and pine, a book with a pressed flower inside. I didn't open the book for days, but I kept it near because it was proof that someone believed there was still a part of me that wanted stories, and maybe they were right. One night, they texted moon's full want to see it together. I stared at the screen for 10 minutes before replying yes, just one word, but it felt like a bridge. We sat in the park, wrapped in coats, sitting on the same bench we used to share before everything unraveled. They didn't ask where I'd been, they only said, "I missed you," and that was all it took to make my chest ache in the best kind of way. Why whispered, "I don't even know who I am anymore," and they answered, "You don't need to, I'll remind you." As many times as it takes, the wind picked up, carried the scent of grass and night, and for the first time in forever, I remembered how it felt to belong somewhere. Even if it was only on a bench under stars with someone who stayed when they walked me home. They didn't hug me, didn't linger. They just looked at me and said tomorrow, same time, and I said okay. Hadn't said okay to anything in weeks, maybe longer, and it felt foreign on my tongue. But right the next morning, I woke up early, not because I had to, but because part of me was beginning to wonder what It would feel like to keep going, to not stop, to trust the hands reaching toward me on. That's when I knew belief doesn't come back all at once. It returns like footsteps, one after the other, and every time someone stays, you remember how to take one more step. The next few days were slow like rivers, no rapids, no crashing sounds, just steady movement through quiet banks of stillness. Sigh. Didn't count the hours anymore. I let them pass without measurement. My friend would arrive without fanfare, without knocking. Sometimes they'd leave a book on the stairs, sometimes a bag of fresh apricots. Sometimes nothing at all but the soft imprint of their footsteps fading down the walkway. They didn't come to rescue me. They didn't come to demand my story. They just came to remind me I still existed in someone's orbit. One evening rain arrived, not the kind that thunders and threatens, but the gentle kind. Like the sky was weeping kindly over the earth, I watched it through the window and thought about how rain always made me feel both lost and found. I remembered how I used to dance in it as a child, how I believed the rain was a kind of forgiveness, and then a knock. Softer than before, and when I opened the door there, they were soaked umbrella, closed hair, dripping eyes, bright eye. Almost asked, "Why would you come in this?" But before I could speak, they held out a thermos and said, "Warm vanilla milk." Thought maybe you needed something soft tonight. Took it with both hands, and something inside me trembled because I had forgotten how it felt to be thought of, to be known in small, gentle ways. We sat on the porch, the rain between us, the steam from the thermos rising like memory. They said nothing for a long time, and then, out of nowhere, they whispered, "I used to be where you are, and I still return there sometimes." I turned to them, half in disbelief, half in wonder, and they nodded. Slow, certain. I used to think I had to be fixed before I could be loved, but someone stayed for me too. And that's how I learned I was never broken, just tired. The words folded around me like a blanket, and I felt seen in a way I didn't know was possible. Not because they had answers, but because they had stood in the same shadows that night I dreamed. In color, for the first time in months, I dreamed of forest and candlelight, of running without fear, of laughter that echoed soft and full. The next day I made tea before they arrived, 2 cups, one for them, one for me. And it wasn't until they knocked that I realized this small act was the beginning of wanting again. They smiled when I handed them the cup, and I noticed the way their shoulders relaxed, like my choice to welcome them mattered too. I said, "I don't know if I'm healing," and they said, "Healing doesn't have to look like progress. Sometimes it just means you let someone in." Again we spent that day rearranging my room, not for function, but for light. We moved the chair from the corner to the window, brushed the dust off the books I'd forgotten how to open. I found an old photograph tucked between 2 pages of me and them years ago, laughing, arms around each other, hearts wide open. I showed it to them, and they smiled. "You've always had light, even when you couldn't see it. You still had." I'd wanted to cry, but the tears didn't come, just warmth, that deep internal kind. Like the body was remembering it was safe. Days became gentler. We went to the same park bench once a week. Sometimes we'd bring a puzzle, sometimes old postcards. Once they brought me a tiny glass jar filled with beach sand and wrote, "Because even memories need containers." I started writing again, not full stories, just fragments, sentences that held feelings I couldn't say out loud. I left one on the table one day accidentally, and they read it. It said, "I want to live, but I don't know how." And when I came back, they had left a note under it. It said, "We'll learn together." I held that paper like it was a lighthouse, because suddenly I wasn't ashamed of the storm. One evening, I asked, "Why do you keep coming back?" And they looked at me like I'd just asked why the moon rises. "'Cause you matter." Because I would have wanted someone to stay if I were you. Because love doesn't run away from silence. And in that moment, I believed them, not fully, but enough to light the candle by my bed again, enough to open the curtains, enough to look at my reflection without turning away. That night, I wrote a letter to myself, to the past version of me who thought no one would ever come back. It said, "You were never too much. You were just alone too long, and now you're not." There is something fragile about hope. When it first returns, it doesn't come in like a thunderstorm. It drifts in like smoke. Like a song you forgot you loved until someone hummed it again. That week, I started making my bed in the morning, not because I was expected to, not because it made me productive, but because I wanted the comfort of climbing into something cared for. My friend noticed, of course they did. They always noticed what no one else would see. They sat down on the edge of the freshly made bed, ran their hand along the smoothness of the blanket, and said, "This feels like you're starting to come home to yourself." Didn't answer. I just looked down and smiled because I didn't know how to say yes without crying later that day. They took me to a greenhouse. It smelled of wet earth and green things of growth and patience. We walked slowly between rows of tiny miracles. Tomatoes the size of pearls, lemon balm, and clay pot sprouts pushing toward light like it was the only truth they knew. They bought me a small fern. Something about it felt right, fragile, but alive. I placed it by my window. And every morning I'd check on it, not obsessively, just gently. The way my friend checked on me, that fern became a quiet promise. If you water it, it will keep growing, even if some leaves fall, even if the light isn't always perfect. One morning, I found a note tucked under its pot. Their handwriting again, it said, "You're growing even when you don't feel lighty." Sat with that line for an hour, not reading it, just holding it. That same afternoon, they brought me to their favorite spot by the river. It wasn't famous. Not on any map, just a flat stone beneath a willow tree where the water ran slow. They said, "This is where I come when I forget how to be human." We sat there for what felt like forever. No talking, just wind, just water, just presence. I asked, "Were you ever afraid you wouldn't make it back to yourself?" They nodded all the time, but I made a deal with myself. If I could survive the day I broke, then I could survive the days after. Looked at them, really looked, and for the first time, I realized they weren't just strong. They were soft, and the softness was what made them unbreakable. That night, I opened my window, let the air in, felt the breeze on my face, and thought, "I'm still here, I'm still here." Next day, I took out the trash without telling myself I had to. I even played a song while doing it, and for a moment my foot tapped, then my head nodded, then laughter. Real, unexpected, uncontrolled. When my friend heard it, they froze, like they were afraid the sound would vanish if they moved too quickly. And then they smiled so wide, it hurt my chest in the best way. They said, "That's the sound I've been waiting for." I didn't even know I was holding my breath until you laughed. We celebrated by sitting on the floor and eating strawberries. No plates, no plans, just sweetness, red hands, and the unspoken agreement that healing is messy and beautiful. Later that week, I had a nightmare, one of the old ones, the kind that leaves your chest aching and your throat dry. I called them something I hadn't done in months. They came without hesitation, brought a blanket and a flashlight, not because the power was out, but because they knew I used to find comfort in shadows made soft by light. They didn't ask about the dream, they just made space for me. And that space was louder than any question could have been. I asked, "Why do you never push me to talk?" They said, "Because I don't need your story to prove your pain. I already believe you." That made me cry. The kind of crying that doesn't come from sadness, but from being believed, from being allowed to exist without defense. Safe you. Days later, I made breakfast: eggs, 2 salty toast, slightly burned. But they ate it like it was a gift from the stars, and maybe it was because it meant I wanted to share again. Even if imperfect, they left a note on the fridge, said, "Best toast of my life, 10/10, would emotionally recover with you." Agani laughed for a full minute. That's when I realized we weren't just surviving anymore, we were beginning to live. Some mornings felt like beginning again, like someone had shaken the snow globe of my soul and I was waking up in a world not yet settled. The kind of morning where you breathe in and the air doesn't taste like weight anymore was on one of those mornings that I cleaned out the box under my bed. The one I'd been ignoring for months, maybe years. It held fragments, old letters, photos that still hurt. wrappers from nights I'd rather forget, proof that I once lived even when I didn't. One toy sat with it, pulled each thing out slowly. Some I kept, most I didn't. He called my friend and asked, "Do you want to come over and burn the past with meat?" They came. Within the hour we built a small fire in the backyard pit. One by one we fed the memories to the flame, and with each flicker the weight lessened. They said, grief doesn't mean keeping everything. Sometimes it means knowing when to let go. As the smoke curled up, carrying pieces of what I no longer needed, they took my hand and whispered, "You don't have to carry it all to honor it." That night, I slept with the windows open, as if to invite the wind into my healing. The days that followed, I began journaling again, not to analyze, not to explain, just to witness my thoughts. Like petals on a river, floating, moving, existing without needing to land anywhere. My friend noticed they always did. Left me a journal of their own. One morning, the cover read, "For everything you feel, but haven't said yet." He held it to my chest for longer than I meant to. Then one afternoon we drove without a destination. Windows down, music low, hearts open. They said, "Want to tell me a story you've never told anyone?" I hesitated, then told them the one I'd buried. The one with the shame and silence. The one I never let see the light. They didn't flinch, didn't offer a fix. They just said, "You were never the villain in your own pain." That changed something in me, Latour. That week we painted the living room. I let them pick the color, a soft sea green. Like memory and new beginnings, wrapped into one. We spilled paint, laughed until our stomachs hurt, sat on the floor with brushes in our hands, and said, "Maybe healing looks like this sometimes, messy, unexpected, full of color." And then a letter came in. The mail from someone I hadn't heard from in years. It carried words I wasn't ready for, apologies, explanations, regrets. I didn't know what to do with it. So I showed my friend. They read it silently, then handed it back, said, "You don't owe anyone a response." Just because they found their timing. That night, I put the letter in a drawer, not out of spite, but out of choice. Because silence can be closure too. A few nights later, I caught my friend watching me as I cooked dinner, their eyes soft quietly. "Proud?" What I asked. They shook their head. "Nothing, just you're here." And I'm lucky to witness. E.T. didn't reply, but I reached out and touched their arm. Because sometimes gratitude doesn't need words. Later, they stayed over, fell asleep on the couch while we watched old movies. I covered them with a blanket, looked at their sleeping face, and thought, "You're the reason I didn't give up when I had every reason to." That night, I wrote something in my journal for the first time without sadness. I wrote, "Maybe I'm not broken, maybe I'm just blooming slowly." And for the first time, I believed it. The next morning, I made 2 cups of coffee, placed one beside them before they woke, then sat by the window and whispered to the light, "Thank you for staying, thank you for staying," until I believed again. There are days you remember not for what happened, but for how you felt. Doing nothing at all that morning was one of those days. The kind where the sky felt kind, where silence wasn't lonely, just soft. My friend and I sat on the porch, drinking warm tea, watching the breeze carry yesterday away. They said healing doesn't always look like movement. Sometimes it's stillness that saves you. Z nodded, because that morning, for the first time in years, stillness didn't scare me. They looked at me then and asked, "Do you remember the first time you felt peace in your own skin?" I paused, not to think, but because I wanted to be honest. Sai said, "Maybe it's no," and they smiled like they'd been waiting for that answer all along. Later we walked through the old neighborhood, past the tree I used to climb, past the bench I used to cry behind, past the street lamp that flickered like it too was unsure how to shine. I pointed to the cracked sidewalk and said, "That's where I fell off my bike and broke my tooth." They laughed, but gently, as if even the pain deserved to be remembered with kindness. That night they read poetry aloud while I made dinner. Their voice like honey, each word settling into the corners of the room. They read some friendships aren't loud, they're quiet anchors that keep you from drifting too far from who you are. I stopped chopping vegetables and looked at them. "You wrote that, didn't you?" They blushed, shrugged, maybe I smiled. Because I knew, and because it meant they had always been writing me into their healing too. That night, we sat on the roof, blankets around our shoulders, looking at stars that felt like soft reminders. They said, "Did you ever think you'd get here?" Shook my head, "No, but now that I am, I don't want to leave." They didn't answer, but they leaned their head on my shoulder, and the silence between us felt holy. In the morning, I found a note taped to my mirror. It said, "You're allowed to love yourself now. The war is over. You made it through." I read it again and again, letting the truth settle, letting the belief come quietly, this time like morning light. That week, I returned a call I'd been avoiding. The voice on the other end was familiar but distant. They asked how I'd been. I said, "Learning to breathe again." They didn't know what to say, and that was okay, because I wasn't looking for their understanding, only my own. When I hung up, my friend was already there, sitting on the floor beside me. "No questions, just presence," they said. "Proud of you," and that meant more than anything else. That week later, we went to the bookstore. I bought a novel I used to love. They bought one they thought I'd love. Now we sat by the cafe window, reading, laughing, noticing how much had changed. "How much hadn't?" they said. "Your laughter sounds different now. Less afraid, more true." I hadn't noticed, but I believed them. That evening, we danced in the living room. No music, just movement, just memory, just freedom. They twirled me once, then whispered, "I never needed you to be okay. I just needed you to stand." I had somehow, against everything I had, stayed. We sat down, breathless and smiling. And I said, "I think I finally see what you saw in me." They reached out, took my hand, and said, "Welcome back." Night, I wrote the friend who stayed until I believed again. Never asked for credit, only space, only time, only truth, and I closed the journal with the softest smile my face had ever made. Sometimes healing looks like ordinary days. The kind with grocery lists and tangled bedsheets where nothing hurts but nothing needs to sparkle either. It was on one of those quiet days that I realized peace wasn't dramatic, it was slow unfolding. Almost shy, my friend sat across from me, folding laundry, humming some old tune. And I thought, maybe this is what safety looks like. They caught me staring. "What?" "Nothing," I said. "Just thank you for what? For never needing me to impress you. We're always enough, even when you didn't believe." ETI nodded, still learning how to receive that kind of love, the unasked for kind. The stay through the storm kind. Later, we took a walk through the park. The trees were just starting to let go of their leaves, gold and copper floating gently, as if gravity had softened. We'd sat on a bench near the fountain. I turned to them and asked, "Did you ever think I wouldn't make it?" They didn't answer right away, then said, "Yes, but I never stopped hoping you would." That kind of honesty didn't hurt, it landed like grace. I leaned back and watched the sky change, and it felt like something inside me was changing too. That evening, we built a pillow fort in the living room, lit candles, ate cereal for dinner, and read children's books out loud, as if our hearts needed simpler stories, ones with clear endings, soft colors, happy truths. They asked, "What do you wish someone had told you when you were younger?" I answered that I was worth staying for, even when I wasn't smiling. They reached for my hand and said, "You are. You always walk." Didn't cry, but I felt something melt. Night, I dreamt of myself at 7 alone, in a playground, sitting on the swing, watching the sky. Watching the sky. My friend was there, sitting beside me, not saying anything, just swinging with me, like they always do. When I woke up, the sun was painting gold across the floorboards, and I knew the dream was more memory than imagination. We went to the lake that weekend, just to listen to the water speak. We skipped stones, counted dragonflies, ate grapes, and shared stories we hadn't told yet. They said, "Do you know what I admire most about you?" I said. "No," they said. "You kept living, even when it didn't feel like life." And I whispered, "You helped me remember how that night by the lake, we didn't speak much. We just watched the stars, and I thought, I don't need to be fixed, I just need to be witnessed." They looked at me then as if they heard my thought and nodded back home. I cleaned my closet, gave away clothes that didn't feel like me anymore, took down the notes of self-doubt taped to my mirror, replaced them with words my friend had written. You are not hard to love. You are just learning how to receive it too, are not behind. You are on time for your own life. You are not a burden. You are a story still unfolding. Read them aloud, each one like medicine that night. We watched the rain fall, neither of us saying much, just knowing that something had shifted again. They leaned their head on my shoulder and whispered, you made ID, leaned mine against theirs and whispered back, because of you. The last morning felt like the first sunlight warming the room before my thoughts arrived. Birds song like quiet applause for simply waking up high, opened my eyes and felt no dread. Just air, just time, just life in the kitchen. My friend was humming, pouring tea into two mismatched mugs. They looked up. You slept well. Nodded. Better than ever. They smiled, and that smile held years of waiting, of wishing, of witnessing. Wheat ate toast, slowly, without rush, without plans, and in the pauses there was peace. Later we walked the path behind the house where the leaves had already begun to fall again, golden reminders that even endings can be beautiful. I asked, why did you stay all that time when I had nothing to give back? They stopped, turned to me, and said, because I wasn't waiting for what you could give, I was just waiting for you. I didn't know what to say, so I reached out, held their hand, and let silence say everything. That evening, I brought out my old sketchbook, the one I hadn't opened in years, the one I'd buried beneath fear. Page by page, I saw pieces of myself drawn in charcoal, in grief, in longing. But then the pages turned and the lines got softer, the shapes more whole, and then there was a drawing of them sitting under a tree, looking up at the star side, drawn it the week they first came back, when I was still unsure of everything, but something in me knew they would stay. They looked at the sketch, touched the page. You saw me even then, and I said you saw me first. That night we sat in the backyard, a fire crackling between us, the scent of wood smoke like memory. They said, tomorrow I have to leave for a while, not forever. But for a while I felt the air shift, the ache of attachment rise. But I breathed through it. Asked, are you coming back? They smiled, of course, but you don't need me in the same way anymore. You're your own home now. I knew they were right. Because the voice in my head wasn't cruel anymore. It was quiet, it was kind. That night we stayed up until dawn, watching the sky become itself again. They handed me a letter tied in a green ribbon for when I forget, I said. They nodded. For when you forget. The next morning, I stood at the doorway, watched them walk down the path, the same one I used to fear walking. Alone, but this time I didn't feel abandoned. I felt full when they turned the corner. They looked back, and I waved it, not goodbye, just until next time. Later, I opened the letter and read, my dearest friend, if you're reading this, it means you're brave. It means you stayed. It means you remembered how to breathe without me sitting beside you. And that's a kind of miracle. Are loved, you are held. You are more than you once believed, and less broken than you ever feared. Keep living, keep writing. Keep choosing gentle over perfectium. Proud of you, and I always will be. The friend who stayed until you believed again. I folded the letter, pressed it against my chest, and whispered, thank you. Then I stepped out into the world, not searching for proof, not waiting for rescues, walking whole finally.